I'm Hannah Pierce, 35 years old, and my parents' favoritism for my younger brother nearly broke me until he found out I had $10 million and lost it. Growing up, I was the invisible child always overshadowed by my brother's endless demands. My parents poured their love money and excuses into him, while I fought for every scrap of attention. I learned early to rely on myself, clawing my way to success in biotech, building a fortune I never flaunted. But my family. They never noticed. They were too busy bailing out my brother's failed schemes, praising his big ideas while dismissing mine. I swallowed the hurt, kept my head down, and built my empire in silence. Then, at a family Christmas dinner not long ago, everything exploded. My brother stumbled across an article about my wealth, $10 million earned through years of grit. His face twisted with rage. "You're sitting on millions and won't help your family," he shouted, slamming his fist on the table. My mother froze her fork, trembling, unable to speak. I'd carried the weight of their favoritism my whole life, but that moment lit a fire in me. I wasn't the quiet sister anymore. What I said next shocked them all, and what my brother lost after that night changed everything. Stick around to hear how my family's betrayal pushed me to draw a line I'll never cross. Have you ever been overshadowed by a sibling? Share your story below, hit like, and subscribe to uncover the full drama. Growing up in our Carmel home felt like living in two different worlds, always scrambling to prove myself while my younger brother Graham Pierce was handed everything. Our parents, Arthur Pierce and Doris Pierce, built a solid middle-class life. Dad was a lawyer, always polished in his suits, cutting deals in Indianapolis. Mom ran an event planning business, charming clients at weddings and fundraisers. But their focus was lopsided, always on Graham, no matter what he did. I was 8 when I saved every penny from my allowance to buy a science book I'd spotted at the local bookstore. Graham, barely 5, got a huge Lego castle set just for bringing home a report card full of C's. "He's doing his best," Mom would say, her voice soft as she patted his head. My straight A grades. They'd nod and move on. One day, I accidentally knocked over Mom's prized crystal vase while cleaning. Dad's shout echoed through the house. "Hannah, can't you be more careful? I was sent to my room for a week." But when Graham smashed his new bike into the neighbor's fence, bending the frame, Mom just chuckled. "Boys are so wild," and replaced it by the weekend. The sting of that double standard cut deep. School became my refuge. I threw myself into science fairs, fascinated by experiments. At 10, I won first place at Carmel High School's regional science fair with a project on plant growth rates. My Aunt Nancy Harper, Mom's younger sister, was there, clapping loudly. "You're a star, Hannah," she said, her smile warm. Mom and Dad were at Graham's soccer practice, cheering for a game he mostly sat out. Nancy's praise was a lifeline, but it couldn't erase the neglect at home. The unfairness kept piling up. At 9, I begged for a chemistry set to try experiments in my room. Dad dismissed it. Too risky for a girl your age. Yet when Graham at 6 wanted a remote control car that cost double, it showed up under the Christmas tree. I'd lie awake replaying their words. Once I overheard Mom tell Dad, "Graham's got so much promise. We need to support him." Promise I was acing every quiz, but they never noticed. Graham's mistakes were excused. Mine were crimes. At a family barbecue when I was 11, I spent hours helping Mom arrange tables and string lights for her clients. A guest praised the setup and Mom beamed, saying, "My Graham worked so hard on this." Graham, who'd been glued to his Game Boy, just smirked. I clenched my fists, my face hot. Aunt Nancy pulled me aside, whispering, "You did the real work, kid. Keep shining." But the hurt lingered. I was invisible no matter how hard I tried. By 12, I gave up hoping for fairness. I saved for months to buy a used microscope, keeping it hidden so Graham wouldn't touch it. My parents never asked about my projects, but they'd rush to fix Graham's messes. When he lost his soccer cleats before a match, Dad drove across town for new ones. When I needed shoes for a science camp I'd earned a spot in, Mom said, "Use your old ones." Aunt Nancy slipped me some cash to help, but it wasn't about money. It was about being unseen in my own family. Those years taught me to depend on myself. Aunt Nancy's quiet support kept me going, but even she couldn't shift my parents' focus from their golden boy. Their favoritism hurt, but it lit a fire in me. I wasn't going to let it hold me back. By my teenage years, the favoritism stung deeper. I was 15, pouring my energy into the science club at Carmel High School, where I built DNA models and planned experiments until midnight. My grades were perfect, but college was a looming expense, and Dad made it clear you're on your own for tuition. So I started working at Main Street Coffee, steaming lattes and scrubbing counters after school. The hours were brutal, scalded fingers, aching legs, but every paycheck brought me closer to my dream. At home, Mom would rave about my brother Graham's big ideas over dinner, barely noticing my exhaustion. At 16, Graham flunked his driving test twice, but Dad still bought him a Jeep Wrangler gleaming in the driveway. "He'll figure it out," Dad said, brushing off the failure. I was still 15, walking to work in sneakers so worn the soles flapped. I saved for months to buy a used graphing calculator for my science projects, while Graham got new headphones without asking. I overheard him boasting to friends, "My parents always have my back." The words twisted in my chest. I'd never felt that kind of support. When I turned 16, Aunt Nancy visited and handed me a heavy book on biotechnology, its cover promising breakthroughs in medicine. "This is your future, Hannah," she said, her eyes shining. I devoured it, reading late into the night, scribbling ideas about diagnostics and gene therapies. That book wasn't just pages, it was a fire fueling my passion for biology. I hid it from Graham, knowing he'd mock it or worse, ruin it. Aunt Nancy's belief in me was a rare gift, one my parents never offered. The double standards kept coming. At 18, I earned a scholarship to a prestigious summer science program, but it didn't cover travel. I asked Mom for a small loan. "Money's tight," she said, her tone final. Days later, they paid to fix Graham's Jeep after he scraped it racing friends. I took extra shifts at the coffee shop, sacrificing sleep to afford the trip. Graham, then 16, cruised past me in his Jeep while I walked home, my backpack stuffed with library books. The unfairness burned, but I channeled it into my work. The science club was my sanctuary. I led experiments, organized regional competitions, and even coached younger students. My teacher, Mrs. Larson, saw my drive. "You're going to do big things, Hannah," she said, after I presented a project on early cancer detection. Her praise hit hard, echoing Aunt Nancy's encouragement. But at home, I'd share my achievements, and Dad would just ask Graham about his soccer practice. Mom stayed buried in her event planning binders, oblivious. By 19, I got into a top university for biology, but the tuition gap was massive. I worked double shifts at Main Street Coffee, balancing classes and study sessions on no sleep. My parents didn't contribute a cent yet. When Graham at 17 pitched a business selling custom sneakers, they gave him $1,500. The idea crashed in weeks, but they just shrugged. I stopped expecting their help, relying on my own grit. Aunt Nancy sent me a card with $60 and a note. "You're unstoppable, Hannah." I pinned it to my wall, a daily reminder of my strength. Those teenage years forged me. The favoritism was a constant weight, but working at the coffee shop, diving into biotech books, and scraping by for college showed me I didn't need my parents' validation. I chose biology not to win their approval, but to prove to myself I could rise above their neglect. That resolve became my foundation, pushing me toward a future they couldn't dim. After diving into college, I set my sights on a biotech career. By 23, I graduated with a biology degree fueled by late-night study sessions and Aunt Nancy's unwavering support. I moved to Indianapolis and launched a biotech startup, betting everything on a rapid blood testing device that could diagnose diseases in minutes. The early days were relentless, pitching to doubtful investors, working in a small lab that hummed with machinery. But I kept going, driven by a vision to transform healthcare. After a few years, my device won FDA approval, and my company's value surged, earning me $10 million. I didn't breathe a word to my family. Their lifelong dismissal made me guard my success like a secret weapon. My brother Graham was stumbling through his own ventures. He poured his energy into an online retail app, calling it a game changer. It was a flop buggy poorly planned and ignored by users. Still, Dad and Mom handed him $50,000 to keep it running. "He's got big ideas," Dad said during a call I caught on a brief visit home. I gripped my coffee mug, remembering how they'd refused to fund my startup years earlier. "Too uncertain," Mom had said, waving off my plans. Graham's app collapsed within months, but my parents just shrugged, as if his failures were endearing. I stayed away from Carmel, only returning for holidays like Thanksgiving or Easter. When I did, I dodged talk about my work. Just staying busy, I'd say, shifting focus to Graham's schemes or Mom's event planning triumphs. Dad showed no curiosity about my life, more absorbed in Graham's potential. Mom would nudge me about finding a real path, as if my career was a passing phase. My reality, a company reshaping medicine, millions in my name, remained hidden. I wasn't keeping it quiet out of humility. I was protecting it from their apathy. At a Thanksgiving gathering, Graham cornered me by the dessert table, pitching a new revolutionary app for custom furniture. "You should back me, Hannah," he said, his tone smug. I forced a nod, muttering, "I'll pass." I hadn't told him about my company, let alone my wealth. Aunt Nancy, sipping wine nearby, gave me a subtle wink, but said nothing. She'd once asked about my work, but I downplayed it with, "It's moving along." Even with her, I stayed cautious, wary of my family turning my success into their opportunity. Graham's failures kept rolling. After his app tanked, Mom and Dad helped him rent a sleek loft in Carmel, no strings attached. I'd built my company from nothing, savings loans and sheer will, without a cent from them. During an Easter visit, Dad wondered aloud why I wasn't more driven like Graham. I nearly laughed. My device was saving lives in clinics nationwide, but to them, I was still the daughter who needed to get serious. The irony cut deep, but I held my tongue, keeping my achievements under wraps. My focus was my work. I expanded my team, upgraded our lab, and secured new patents. Industry leaders hailed me as a trailblazer. Medical journals praised my device's precision. But every Carmel visit dragged me back to the same old dynamic: Graham the star, me the afterthought. At one holiday dinner, Mom raved about Graham's bold vision while I sat silently, my success a private fortress. Aunt Nancy leaned over, whispering, "You're doing enough, Hannah." Her words steadied me, but the old pain lingered. Hiding my life was a choice. I wanted to throw my success in their faces, make them see what I'd built without them. But I knew how it would play out. Graham would ask for a loan. Mom and Dad would brush it off. So I stayed quiet, letting my company thrive in the shadows. My wealth, my device, my victories, they were mine, earned through years of being overlooked, and I wasn't about to let my family claim them. Last summer, a family barbecue turned tense. The backyard in Carmel buzzed with neighbors and the smell of grilled burgers, but I felt like an outsider in my own family. My brother Graham had brought his new girlfriend, Raven Scott, an Instagram influencer with a bright smile and a knack for attention. Halfway through the evening, they cornered me near the picnic table, their faces lit with excitement. "Hannah, we've got a killer idea," Graham said, his voice brimming with confidence. "An app for personalized travel itineraries. We need $1 million to launch it." "You're doing well. Why not invest?" I scanned their pitch deck, a flashy PDF Raven had thrown together. It was all buzzwords, and no substance, vague projections, no market research. "This won't work," I said, keeping my tone even. "You've got no data on user demand or competition." Graham's face reddened. "You're just shooting it down because you're jealous," he snapped. Raven chimed in, her voice sharp. "Graham said you'd be like this, too selfish to help." I stood my ground, explaining the gaps in their plan, but their glares only hardened. They didn't want critique. They wanted my money. Later, as we sat around the fire pit, Dad pulled me aside. "Why can't you support your brother?" he asked, his tone heavy with disappointment. "Family helps family." Mom overheard and jumped in, her voice cutting. "Graham has vision, Hannah. You could learn from him." The words hit like a slap. I'd built a biotech empire from nothing, but to them, I was the one lacking ambition. I bit back a retort about my $10 million fortune still hidden from them. Their favoritism wasn't new, but hearing Mom praise Graham's vision while dismissing me stung deeper than ever. Aunt Nancy tried to smooth things over. "Let's all take a breath," she said, placing a hand on my shoulder as we cleared plates. "Hannah's just being practical." But her words couldn't bridge the gap. Graham sulked by the grill, Raven scrolling her phone, while Mom and Dad fussed over them like they were the victims. I felt the weight of their judgment, their assumption that I was the problem. "I'm not the bank," I said quietly to Aunt Nancy, my voice tight. She nodded, but her eyes were sad, as if she knew I was slipping further away from the family. The rest of the evening was a blur. Graham and Raven whispered to each other, shooting me pointed looks. Mom kept praising Graham's bold ideas, recounting his failed app like it was a badge of honor. "He's trying so hard," she told a neighbor, ignoring my presence. I stayed silent, helping with cleanup to avoid more confrontation. But inside I was seething, not just at their bias, but at how they painted me as the ungrateful one. My success, my company, my life, they didn't know any of it, and I wasn't sure they deserved to. As the night wound down, Raven approached me again, her tone sugary but laced with venom. "You could have made this easy, Hannah," she said. "Graham deserves better than your attitude." I stared at her, my patience gone. "He deserves to plan better," I replied, walking away before she could respond. Dad caught the exchange and shook his head, muttering about my stubbornness. Mom didn't even look at me, too busy fussing over Graham's bruised ego. Aunt Nancy offered a quiet, "You did the right thing, but it couldn't erase the isolation creeping in." That barbecue marked a shift. I'd always felt sidelined, but now I saw how deeply my family's loyalties lay with Graham, no matter how many times he failed. Their accusations that I wasn't supportive wasn't family cut through years of buried hurt. I left Carmel that night with a clarity I hadn't felt before. My silence about my success wasn't just about protecting myself anymore. It was about refusing to let them claim any part of what I'd built. They didn't see me, and I was done trying to make them. This Christmas was supposed to be a cozy family dinner. The dining room in my parents' Carmel home glowed with candlelight, the table laden with roast turkey and pumpkin pie. I sat quietly, steeling myself for the usual family dynamic, Graham, the star, me, the afterthought. But tonight was different. My brother Graham held up his phone, his face twisted with anger. "So, Hannah," he said, voice loud enough to silence the room, "when were you going to tell us you're sitting on $10 million? He waved a news article about my biotech company, my secret now exposed. The room froze. Mom's fork clattered against her plate. Dad's eyes narrowed, and Raven, Graham's girlfriend, smirked, leaning forward. "You've been hiding this while we're struggling," Graham shouted, slamming his phone down. "You're so selfish." Raven egged him on, her voice sharp. "She's got millions, Graham. Demand your share." I gripped my napkin, my pulse racing. For years, I'd kept my success hidden, knowing they'd react this way, not with pride, but with entitlement. I stood my chair, scraping the floor. "Selfish?" I said, my voice steady, but burning. "Let's talk about fairness. I paid my own way through college, scraping by at a coffee shop while you got a Jeep for failing your driving test, Graham. I begged for startup money, and you, Dad, said it was too risky. Yet you gave Graham $50,000 for his doomed app and another chunk for his next flop." My words poured out, each one a release of years of resentment. "I built my company alone. You never cared until you saw dollar signs." Graham's face flushed. "You think you're better than us," he spat. "You hoarded your money while we needed help." Raven nodded, crossing her arms. "Family shares." "Hannah, That's how it works. I laughed, a bitter sound that echoed in the silent room. Family. Where was family when I was working double shifts to afford tuition? Where was family when I pitched my ideas and got nothing but shrugs? Aunt Nancy, sitting quietly, tried to intervene. "Hannah's right," she said softly. "She earned this on her own." But her words were drowned out by Graham's glare. Mom sat stunned, her face pale, unable to speak. Dad shook his head, muttering, "You should have told us, Hannah." Not an apology. Not pride, just blame. I looked at Mom, waiting for her to say something, anything to acknowledge the years of neglect. She stared at her plate, lips tight, offering nothing. The silence was louder than any argument. My chest ached, not from sadness, but from the finality of it all. They didn't see me. They saw a bank account. Raven leaned toward Graham, whispering loud enough for me to hear, "She owes you, babe. Push harder." That was it. I grabbed my coat from the chair, my hands trembling. "I don't owe you anything," I said, my voice cutting through the tension. "I've spent my life proving myself to a family that never noticed. I'm done." I walked toward the door, the smell of turkey fading behind me. Graham shouted after me, "You're turning your back on us." I didn't turn around. Mom's silence, Dad's disapproval, Raven's greed, it was all too much. Aunt Nancy followed me to the porch, her eyes wet. "Hannah, please," she said, grabbing my arm. "They're wrong, but don't shut us out." I hugged her, my throat tight. "I love you, Aunt Nancy, but I can't keep doing this." I stepped into the cold December air, my breath visible, my decision clear. That night, I drove back to Indianapolis, the lights of Carmel fading in my rearview mirror. I wasn't just leaving a dinner, I was leaving a family that had never truly been mine. My wealth, my work, my worth. They were mine alone, and I would protect them from those who only saw me as a means to an end. After that Christmas, I walked away from my family for good. My phone buzzed with messages from Dad, Mom, and my brother Graham in the weeks that followed, but I let them pile up unanswered. Their calls went to voicemail, their texts ignored. I'd spent years chasing their approval only to face accusations and greed when my success came to light. The silence I chose wasn't revenge, it was freedom, a line drawn to protect the life I'd built. Graham's life unraveled fast. He sank what little money he had into a cryptocurrency scheme, chasing quick riches with no research. The market crashed, wiping him out. Raven, his influencer girlfriend, vanished as soon as his bank account dried up. "She left me high and dry," he complained in a voicemail I never returned. He moved into a rundown apartment, scraping by on government assistance, his dreams of startups abandoned. The golden child who'd always been propped up by Mom and Dad was now adrift, his failures a mirror of their blind support. A letter arrived from Dad and Mom months later, their handwriting shaky on thin paper. They apologized for misunderstandings, claiming they hadn't meant to hurt me. "We're proud of you, Hannah," they wrote, but the words felt hollow, too late to mend decades of neglect. I read it once, then tucked it away, unwilling to meet them halfway. They'd chosen Graham over me time and again. Now they faced the cost of that choice. I wasn't angry anymore. I was done. Aunt Nancy called one evening, her voice soft but heavy. "I understand why you're pulling away," she said, "but don't shut me out too." I thanked her, my heart aching for the one person who'd seen my worth. Still, I kept my distance, needing space from everyone tied to that painful past. "I need time," I told her, my words gentle but firm. She didn't push, but her sigh lingered in my mind, a reminder of the family I'd once hoped for. My focus turned to my company in Indianapolis. I poured my energy into a new medical device, a portable diagnostic tool that could detect infections in seconds. It was a bold step, riskier than my first, but I thrived on the challenge. Investors lined up, and within months the device hit the market, earning praise from hospitals and doubling my company's reach. My wealth grew, but more than that, my work saved lives, a quiet validation no family approval could match. I wanted to give others the chance I'd fought for, so I founded a $500,000 scholarship fund for independent students in Indiana. It targeted kids like me, those overlooked scraping by with dreams bigger than their circumstances. At the launch event, a young woman thanked me, tears in her eyes, saying the scholarship would let her study biology without working 3 jobs. Her gratitude hit me harder than any family praise ever could. I'd built something meaningful, not just for myself, but for those who'd walk a similar path. Meanwhile, Graham's life stagnated. Without mom and dad's handouts, he couldn't muster the drive to start over. He took odd jobs, living paycheck to paycheck, his confidence eroded. Dad and mom, once so quick to bail him out, were now isolated in their Carmel home. They'd lost touch with both of us, Graham too proud to ask for help, me unwilling to return. Their favoritism had fractured our family, leaving them alone with their regrets. Aunt Nancy told me they rarely left the house, their social circle shrinking as neighbors whispered about their broken family. Looking back, I see the lesson carved into every step of my journey. Self-reliance pulled me through years of unfairness, turning pain into strength. Favoritism, like my parents showed Graham, doesn't just hurt the overlooked, it destroys the bonds that hold a family together. I didn't need their validation to thrive, but I wish they'd seen that sooner for all our sakes. My story isn't just mine. It's a warning and a hope for anyone fighting to be seen. To everyone who's followed this story, thank you for listening. Your time and attention mean more than I can say. I hope my journey resonates, whether you've faced similar struggles or simply believe in standing up for your worth. Share your thoughts. What lessons have you learned from your own challenges? Your stories matter, and I'd love to hear them.